This is your daily scripture for January 12th. My name is Henry Loke. This is God's Feeding Station. Happy Monday. Hope you had a good weekend. We continue on in the Gospel of Mark chapter 8. In those days, when again a great crowd had gathered and they had nothing to eat, he called his disciples to him and said to them, I have compassion on the crowd because they have been with me now 3 days and have nothing to eat. And if I send them away hungry to their homes, they will faint on the way. And some of them have come from far away. And his disciples answered him, How can one feed these people with bread here in this desolate place? And he asked them, How many loaves do you have? They said 7. And he directed the crowd to sit down on the ground. And he took the 7 loaves, and having given thanks, he broke them and gave them to his disciples to set before the people. And they set them before the crowd. And they had a few small fish. And having blessed them, he said that these also should be set before them. And they ate and were satisfied. And they took up the broken pieces left over, 7 baskets full. And there were about 4,000 people. And he sent them away. And immediately he got into the boat with his disciples and went to the district of Dalmanutha. The Pharisees came and began to argue with him, seeking from him a sign from heaven to test him. And he sighed deeply in his spirit and said, Why does this generation seek a sign? Truly, I say to you, no sign will be given to this generation. And he left them, got into the boat again, and went to the other side. Now they had forgotten to bring bread, and they had only 1 loaf with them in the boat. And he cautioned them, saying, Watch out. Beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod. And they began discussing with one another the fact that they had no bread. And Jesus, aware of this, said to them, Why are you discussing the fact that you have no bread? Do you not yet perceive or understand? Are your hearts hardened? Having eyes, do you not see? And having ears, do you not hear? And do you not remember? When I broke the 5 loaves for the 5,000, how many baskets full of broken pieces did you take up? They said to him, 12. And the 7 for the 4,000, how many baskets full of broken pieces did you take up? And they said to him, 7. And he said to them, Do you not yet understand? And they came to Bethsaida, and some people brought to him a blind man and begged him to touch him. And he took the blind man by the hand and led him out of the village. And when he had spit on his eyes and laid his hands on him, he asked him, Do you see anything? And he looked up and said, I see people, but they look like trees walking. Then Jesus laid his hands on his eyes again, and he opened his eyes. His sight was restored, and he saw everything clearly. And he sent him to his home, saying, Do not even enter the village. And Jesus went on with his disciples to the villages of Caesarea Philippi. And on the way, he asked his disciples, Who do people say that I am? And they told him, John the Baptist, and others say Elijah, and others one of the prophets. And he asked them, But who do you say that I am? Peter answered him, You are the Christ. And he strictly charged them to tell no one about him. And he began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders and the chief priests and the scribes and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. And he said this plainly. And Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. But turning and seeing his disciples, he rebuked Peter and said, Get behind me, Satan, for you are not setting your mind on the things of God, but on the things of man. And calling the crowd to him with his disciples, he said to them, If anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever would save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake and the gospel's will save it. For what does it profit a man to gain the whole world and forfeit his soul? For what can a man give in return for his soul? For whoever is ashamed of me and of my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, of him will the Son of Man also be ashamed when he comes in the glory of his Father with the holy angels. Oh, we got a lot to talk about today. And it involves Peter and Jesus and Messiahship and why he came and all of that. Where do we start today? Jesus, for the first time, talks about plainly talks about his purpose and his mission today. Peter has called Jesus Messiah, rightly so. And Jesus now undertakes this explanation about what it really means to be the Messiah. And it causes confusion. Because it's not only, it doesn't only involve what it means for Christ to be Messiah, it involves what it means for us to be disciples. He starts to teach them that he's got to suffer, and he's going to be rejected, and he's going to be killed. And it's all going to happen at the hands of the elders, the chief priests, and the teachers of the law. But he'll rise 3 days. He'll rise 3 days after his death. This is the task now Jesus takes on, right? Explaining to the 12 what this true meaning of messiahship means, why he came. Why did he really come? And I can imagine, it totally confuses these guys, these 12 young men. When Jesus finally starts to talk about who he truly is, he doesn't do it with, I'll say, the misunderstanding of what Messiah was going to be, but it's to define it in terms of God's intentions for him and what that really means. And this is beyond their understanding, right? He's not the expected teacher who's gonna reinstitute Jewish law into Jewish life, right? He teaches in parables. He teaches in a way that only those who are truly seeking God and have the understanding of the Holy Spirit can understand what he's saying. And he's talking about God's kingdom in such a different way that they've been taught, right? And I said this a lot last year. I think the reason that people flock to Jesus in part is because his message is so positive, right? Love, forgiveness, his hanging out with sinners and hanging out with prostitutes and people who, tax collectors, people who need, right? As he says, people who need the doctor, right? The sick don't need it. The sick need a doctor, not the healthy, right? He brings the message of the gospel to those who truly, truly need it. And so he's not the stereotypical Messiah that they have been groomed to expect, right? There is no royal establishment. There's no establishment of kingdom. There's no driving out of Rome. There's no cleansing of the land of the Gentiles. As a matter of fact, he's welcoming people outside Israel, right? Which should not come as a surprise because God talked about how he was going to do that. Paul talks about that in Romans, right? Those who are not my people will be called my people. So he seems to be reinterpreting things, reinterpreting God's commandments, forgiving sins, exhibiting power over nature, right? God is speaking through him, right? This is not about victory and success from a worldly perspective. From a worldly perspective, it's about rejection and suffering and death. That's what's happening here. And when he speaks about these issues, about who he truly is, it's the Son of Man must suffer many things at the hands of men. Right? And this is strange, right? Never in Israel was it heard that Messiah should suffer. Right? There's kind of this image of the suffering servant in Isaiah, but there's really no evidence that he was going to die and be put to death at the hands of man. So this suffering that Jesus is talking about, right? It's not even something that you can equate to what's talked about in the Psalms, right? The way to Jerusalem is a bitter road. right? Lined with people who have been crucified. I said, I said this many times. If you're new here, you'll hear me say this a lot. I believe Jesus saw people crucified all the time because it was such a punishment du jour of Rome in the day. They'd be all over the place as a warning to those who would think about crossing Rome. Cross us, this is the fate that awaits you. So this is what the road to Jerusalem is lined with. But this is what God has outlined for him before the foundations of the world. He has to suffer. He has to suffer. Taking on the sins of the world requires nothing less. And again, it's not the hand, his death is not going to come at the hands of godless and wicked people, right? It comes at the hands of the elders, the chief priests, and teachers of the law. Right? And it's not an accident. It's carefully calculated. It's very thoroughly thought out. The religious leaders get together, they deliberate, and they talk about how they're going to do this, and they justify their actions by the law, by the standards of the law and morality, and they think they are doing service to God in doing what they're about to do. Right? It's not going to be an angry mob that lynches or beats him. Right? He's going to be arrested with official warrants. It's going to be done illegally in the dead of night, but it's going to be done by what is going to be considered the rules of law. And he's going to be tried, he's going to be executed, and it's going to be the Jewish Sanhedrin that are going to initiate this whole thing and then hand him over to Rome to be carried out because they cannot carry out the death sentence. And this has got to be shocking. It's definitely offensive to Peter. But he talks about this plainly, the gospel says. The word for plainly, the word for plainly here is boldly, confidently. But at this, right, and true to Peter's character, he recoils from this. This is a horrible thing to him. And Peter, without knowing it, I'm sure, opposes God. Right? Because suffering and dying is the only way to destroy the strongholds of Satan, right? To defeat Satan, to defeat death. That's the only way to do it. And so, when Peter rebukes him, it is the word that's used here is the word for rebuking an evil spirit. But now there's a problem. Peter is thinking in terms of the worldly, where Jesus is focused on the spiritual, the godly. And so in Peter's rebuke, there's an opposition directly to God. And Peter's human terms are at direct or indirect conflict with the heavenly goal of what God intends here. And now, so when Jesus says to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan," Peter's chosen the wrong side here. You hear me talk about it's either of one or the other. It's of God or it's of Satan. And getting in the way of this plan of salvation, as Peter is doing here, that is a device of Satan. And so Jesus takes Peter's rebuke and turns it back on him. Right? Jesus, the definition of Messiah is not satanic. But Peter's attempt to thwart him going through what he must go through is. Right? This is the word, Jesus rebukes Peter in the same way he rebukes Satan in the wilderness. And the problem here is you cannot have a mix of truth and falsehoods. Right? You cannot say on one hand you are the Messiah and then say, no, you cannot do what God has intended for you. Can't go both ways, right? And so there's in Peter, there's partial truths playing here, and those are dangerous. And I understand, right? For Peter, it's unthinkable that the Son of Man should die, right? But for Jesus, he knows it's inevitable. And so Peter cannot have this wrong idea, and the disciples cannot have this wrong idea of what Messiahship is, what Jesus is. They have to have a clear understanding. Because with the understanding of what Jesus is and who Jesus is and what Messiahship means, also defines what discipleship means. If we're going to be disciples of Jesus, we are to be like him. And being like Jesus is loving even unto death. And that's what a lot of us struggle with. But that's the truth of it. And that's why the disciples need to understand it. And I think eventually so that we understand it clearly. Have a great rest of your day. Lord willing, we'll talk again tomorrow. Take care. Bye-bye.